Hey, good morning, everybody. It's Michael Ballmer from Ironside, and I am here to do a little webinar on Power BI and row-level security. All right, and today's agenda is on the screen. Hopefully, everybody can see that. So we're going to talk a little bit about what row-level security is in Power BI, and we're going to go through some steps on how to actually add row-level security, and then actually how to test and preview that row-level security. And not only in the desktop, but also in the web-based interface. So again, this is part of our Ironside Take30. It's going to be somewhat brief, so we're going to move through things pretty quickly, but we're going to talk through a couple of our agendas for the next couple of weeks. And I'm going to let my colleague Scott go through this slide real quick.
Hey everybody, so wanted to give you a preview of some of the upcoming events. This is our schedule. So this week, of course, is Power BI and row-level security. Next week, we're getting back to Cognos and doing a deep dive on data sets. At the end of this week, we're going to have a new session scheduled live that will detail the sessions for the next 6 weeks of this. And also, I want to announce the introduction of something called the Take30 one-on-one session. So this is an opportunity for you to schedule time with Ironside's consulting team to discuss any questions you have or challenges relating to some of these various technologies, or from a very vendor neutral perspective. A registration page is going to be available soon to allow you to book a time and submit your question. So thanks for that. And if there are questions in the meantime, certainly you can send them to here-to-help@ironsidegroup.com. The other thing that I will say is, as we go along through Michael's presentation here, feel free to submit questions via the question control panel in GoToWebinar. All right, so we're going to start up a poll right now. We're going to throw that up for 20 seconds. We capture that, and then we're going to move on. So this is about your organization's level of experience with Power BI. So go ahead and jump into the poll. Looks like a lot of organizations are new to Power BI. But some experimentation is going on. Okay, great. So thank you very much for that. And with that, I'll turn it back to Michael.
All right, good deal. Thanks, Scott. All right, so since everybody is sort of somewhat new to Power BI, I want to talk through some key terms just as far as the software that's being used as part of today's presentation. The three main things we're going to talk about that we're going to show are the Power BI desktop client, which is again the Windows client that you use to build Power BI reports and also data sets, which are metadata models. The Power BI service, which is again the web interface, so the online software as a service offering from Microsoft that you publish your reports or data sets to. And then a data set itself, which again is a metadata model in Power BI service. So again, if you've used other legacy BI tools, a metadata model is a very common scenario. So again, that's when you see data sets, that's what we're going to look at, okay? And so we're going to implement row-level security, right? And then it's important that you understand the row-level security is done in the data set itself. So it's not done at each report, but you do it by each data set, all right? And so what is row-level security? So I've got a nice little diagram here, but we're going to use an example of my colleague here, John Fellner. So John Fellner logs in, and he has a table set up that has his security in it, where he can only see the country of France. So if he has a report, let's say this is the master data that's available to John in the data set, okay? So when he looks at it, we want to make sure that when John logs in, he's automatically, without him knowing it, I guess, without him being able to override it, he has a filter that's going to get applied like this, and so that he only sees the records in the table, or the data set, excuse me, that belong to France, okay? So it does filter the data and restricts the data at the row level in the data itself. Again, it's not by report, but it's by data set model, okay? Now, how do you actually go about doing this? It's simple enough. Is you open up your data set. So again, you start off with the pre-existing data set metadata model, right? And in there, you open it in Power BI desktop. There, if you'll go to the modeling tab under the security section, you'll see an object that says manage roles, okay? So what manage roles does is allows you to create multiple roles in your model for security. Now there's two types of ways to apply role level security, right? And you can do it through dynamic role level security, so based on a user's email address, for example. So John Doe logs in, I log in, whoever logs in, there's some kind of security that's dynamically configured to automatically associate their email address to a filter that's being applied behind the scenes. Additionally, you can do it manually. Okay, now we're not going to talk really about manually, the manual setup as part of this webinar, but a manual setup would be that you would go through and define France, whatever let's say country, so say France, UK, Americas, Canada, whatever it may be, and then you would individually sign people to that, right? So it's a manual process. It's not dynamic in any way, and if you need to change it, you'd have to manually modify it. Whereas the dynamic situation is going to be based on email addresses, and it's a little bit more robust. Okay, so we'll talk through this, and again, we're going to focus mostly on the dynamic role level security. Now, I do want to point out that that role level security that is implemented is implemented at the database. This does not replace, does not replace the role level security that might be implemented in your database. So if you have Oracle or SQL Server and you have role level security implemented on the database itself, in the database, the Microsoft database or Oracle database, this is not going to replace it. It's just going to augment that. Okay?
Hey, Michael, just real quick here. It's interesting because we just had a question come in around that, what some of the differences are between implementing it in the database and the metadata, but I suppose we'll go through that. But I also want to remind people to put questions in that we can answer at the end, because we do have a question and answer period.
Oh, great. Yeah, good idea. So again, this is, we're going to go through the content fairly fast, but definitely this is a lot of time left for Q&A, so definitely type in your questions into the box here. So really the big difference here is if you implement the role level security at the database level, that's being managed by your DBA, right? So there really isn't much you can do to change that or modify it. Whereas implementing role level security in the Microsoft Power BI data set, it gives you the autonomy to manage and maintain that, right? So that's really the difference here, right? Now, they both work in very similar fashions, but obviously you're going to have a little bit more robust functionality by actually implementing inside of the data set, inside the Power BI desktop or Power BI data set, right? And most of my clients that I know simply do it at the data set level, at the metadata model level itself, right? So this is a probably fairly common scenario, but really the difference is, one's done in the database and is managed by a different team, whereas if you do it Power BI, you as an admin would be responsible for maintaining it. All right, so one of the key things that you need to do to set up role level security is, because for dynamic role level security, is you're going to want to have a table. Either you can manually enter this, or realistically you would have it fed from a database or some automated source. It could be a CSV file, it could be an Excel file, whatever, but there should be an external table somewhere that has a list of email addresses for each user, and then what equivalent filter they should be filtered on. So in this example, country is what we're going to use for our example, but it could be territory, it could be store, it could be a product number, it could be really anything. And it could also be multiple. It doesn't have to be a one-to-one. So John Fellner, for example, could belong to multiple countries. So in this example, we're just doing a one-to-one to keep it simple. But again, you would want a table that has email address and then a corresponding record or two that tells me what that user should have access to, right? So that's important that you do create this table. Now for this example, I manually created one in my Power BI data set using the Power BI desktop. But again, you would normally get this fed from a database, and there would be some automatic process that would update that table with new users and whatnot as you see fit. So how does this work? Okay, so high level is, if you're in Power BI desktop, you're going to click on Manage Roles, okay? And then you're going to see this Manage Roles screen. And the Manage Roles screen, if you look here, is going to ask you to create roles. Now, again, we're doing dynamic, so we really just need one role. And this role is going to be dynamically filtered based on email address. addresses. Now, if you're doing it manually, you would actually create multiple roles, and you would have to go through and define what that means, right? But in this case, I created a role called username security, and I can actually misspell it here. But as I see, I have a username security, and then it's going to apply a filter to my table called security table. Now, my security table is that table I showed you in the prior slide, which is this guy right here, which is simply just a list of email addresses and countries, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to apply a filter based on the email so that it's going to filter this table on John Fellner, for example, and then by nature, it's going to mean he's only going to be able to see France, okay? And if you look at how that's applied, we're going to use a DAX function called username or user principal name, and we're going to filter a column. So this username column is actually a physical column name in my table, right? So it's going to take the email address, and it's going to apply a where clause, if you will, and it's going to filter that table, my security table, down to that person. Now, in this example, I did use username. I do want to recommend that you use user principal name. Basically, they do very similar things, but the key is that user principal name will always return an email address. So depending on if you're in the desktop or in the web client, username DAX function returns something a little different, but user principal name is actually recommended more so just because it always returns an email address. And again, it'll return an email in the form of whatever your company set up as, or John Doe or whatever it may be, right? So again, this security table is an actual physical table in my model that I created, right? Now, if I look on the next screen, what I can see here is that my security table is actually joined into my model. So this is a very simple data set model in Power BI. So and we did that on purpose, but what the join is, I have a security table that has a list of the email addresses and countries attached to them, and I join it to my dimension table called country, which then joins to my fact. Now, it's important that you understand that you should join to your dimension table, because if you have multiple facts, let's say you have actuals versus budget or some kind of planning data, or it could be, different levels of granularity, whatever it may be, you're usually going to join on a centralized dimension table, right? So the idea is we want to join to that dimension table, apply the security there, and then force it downstream to every fact table that's involved, right? So regardless if I pick from financials and don't pull anything from the other tables, the security filter is going to go all the way back and push it downstream from the country dimension. So again, there's my security table, and that's how it's applied. So the key when you set this join up is that you make sure that you apply security in both directions, okay? So when you do that, that's going to force the security to be applied no matter what. So basically what happens is if you don't do that, then what would happen is somebody, if they only pull from financials fact table, then they wouldn't get the security by default, right? So this forces the security to be applied always, okay? Now, you can actually test, once you set this up, you can actually do a couple of tests inside the desktop tool to see if it's working correctly. So in this case, I have a user, Marissa, and I'm going to use her email address, which is set up in my table here. So I'm going to do the View As option up at the top, and I'm going to come down here, and I'm going to make sure that I check my role off, which is username security, and then I'm also going to make sure, this is very important, you check the other user box, and I'm going to type in her email address. So I can type in any email address that's available in my table to test. So when I type in her email address, hit OK, what you should see is a view like this, which is basically going to give you a little yellow box telling you that, hey, listen, you are now viewing this report, right, or this data set, if you will, by her email, right, by this user. And so, again, this is a data set, so you're really not going to necessarily have a report built on it, though you could, right? You could have a report built in there. And so this is my little test case. So I have a very simple report, but what I'm showing here is I'm proving that Canada is being filtered for Marissa, right? And then the gross sales and the sales themselves are also being filtered. So all I'm doing is I'm just showing the data behind the scenes, and I'm proving that it is being filtered, right? Now, once you've got your physical data set model working in Power BI Desktop, the next step is you're going to want to publish that to the web, right? So Power BI Service. You publish it, just like any other data set, nothing special there. But what's going to be key is that to actually finish the implementation is you do have to assign users to that security. So you have to enforce the role security on the users. And the way you do that is you go find your data set in Power BI Desktop, Power BI Service, and you click on the security menu option, right? And when you click on it, it's going to show you, and again, we're in the web, it's going to show you the security role that you set up called username. You need to add people to it so that it knows to apply the security to these people. And so that's key. Now, by default, you can add individuals, but that would be kind of, you know, wouldn't give you a lot of advantage, but if you're going to have to do this dynamic, so you probably want to use a group like everyone or field reps or some kind of group that's defined in your Active Directory. So you would define a group that you want the security to be applied to, and then you would add that as a member of that, right? Now, additionally, you can test. You can test this as those individual users to prove that it is working in the web. And the way you do that is after you add the user to the role, you can click the 3 dots over here next to the role name on the same security screen and select test as a role. And by default, it's going to open it up and it's going to use your email address or whoever you're logged in as, right? So it's going to show you the data. In this case, you know, I'm set myself up, but I can come up here and I can click this drop down and I can change it to somebody else and I can test any other user. So in this case, I'm going to test John Fellner, right? So I click on John Fellner and I look at it and I can see what this view looks like if I was to view it as John Fellner. And again, I have his email address in there so I can see what, you know, it is using his email address, and I know that he only can see France, and I can prove out that he can only see France. Okay. So again, this little report is not really a report that's supposed to be consumed by anybody. It's just built in with my data set just to prove that the data is working. So it gives me a way to visualize the data, right? You can actually use any report that you want to test the data. I just built it in. I built a really simple example inside of my Power BI desktop. Okay. Now I do want to point out something why this is important. Okay. What's coming down the pipeline, and we can talk about this. And there's, you know, if you guys have questions about it, is there's going to be a enterprise semantic models that Power BI is coming out with called composite models. Right. It's very, very important. This came out. They released this talk last week. So I don't know it's going to come out until later this summer. But what that does is allows you to create an enterprise semantic model, right, that other local models can consume. So you might build a, let's say, material master or a sales master or a whatever, a customer master model that you would build and own as administrator that others would consume in their data sets. So they, instead of building a model all over again, if they just wanted customer information, then they would just consume it from your model. And as such, they would also consume all your metadata changes, like anything that you went through, named, any role level security that you implement, right? All the calculations, etc., will be a part of that. So this idea of this composite model, again, is very important, and especially when it comes to role level security, because if you implement role level security in your master model, others can consume that and not have to worry about implementation of it. So if you make a change to the master model, every other model that uses it would also consume it, right? All right, so that was my, again, somewhat brief introduction to role level security, right? So we're not going to Q&A. So again, here's who I am. And again, here to help is our email address. So any questions you guys might have about Power BI or Cognos or whatever it is, again, there is an email address I want you guys to email to, okay? Now, I'm going to potentially open up the questions Q&A, and I think John, I think you have the questions, or Scott, one of you guys have them. So,
yeah, there's one that came through, but if you guys, you know, want to type others, or if you want to speak up, we can unmute you guys. But let me just start with this one. I think you kind of reviewed it just real quick here. Question is, can you implement role level security at a group level using something like Active Directory? So that screen that you had a few slides back,
right,
it not only allows you to pick names, but you could also pick AD groups if you're integrated with AD. Is that correct?
Right, exactly. So again, it depends on the granularity, right? So generally speaking, you're going to apply security in the model, like the actual data level filters. by user, because each user can only see a certain territory or region or store, or whatever it may be. But when you apply the security, when you actually force the security onto people, you force it by, be it like potentially a group, right? So you would say everybody has the consuming, or you could say some special group which is just the sales reps, but everybody that's in finance or everybody that's a regional manager does not have any filters applied to them, right? So again, you can pick and choose who gets the filter. The filter itself should be at the user level or some kind of combination of that so that you can control the exact granularity. But again, you can control when it's applied or when it's not applied by groups.
Okay. There's another one in here. What recommendations do you have if I need to add or change either what a user can see or if I need to add or remove users from the security? How's that handled?
Good question. So again, you want to consume this from a table that's in your database. So you'd have to have some process that populates a table with email addresses and their corresponding data that they can see. So again, like in our example, it was country, but it could be territory, region. So you would maintain it outside the actual list of security, if you will, the data level security. Once it's implemented, you would potentially maintain it outside of Power BI in the database. So if you add or remove users or change territories for a rep, for example, you would do it in the database, and then it would be consumed like any other data in your Power BI model, right? You'd have to potentially refresh the data so that it's read again and loaded into memory, but you would actually maintain it outside of Power BI. So once it's set up, again, there isn't a whole lot of maintenance, hopefully, for you to do, right? It would be more robust, and you can automatically update the data through some external process.
Okay, I do have another one here. How would this relate to security I may have implemented in analysis services if I built a model there? And
it wouldn't, right. So it wouldn't replace it. To be honest, if you have the security already in analysis services, then you probably, unless it's different somehow and it's an augmentation of it, you probably would not replace that. You would probably just consume the analysis services security. So, and again, you'll notice that there's a lot of similarity, and a lot of people don't realize this, but Power BI basically is analysis services behind the scenes, right? It's the core model of it. So a lot of the DAX functions are going to be exactly the same. So again, you would be an overlap if you were to build it in your model. So you could remove it from analysis services and put it into Power BI, but realistically, you probably would not do that. You would just leave it in analysis services and maintain it there.
okay. I have another one here. What if I have multiple tables to secure and potentially on different attributes? What would be a good design to sort of handle that?
Right, good question. So it really depends on the model, right? But again, if you create the if you go back and look at the join, right, you would create it again on your dimension table. So that's key because on the dimension table, that dimension table would connect to your multiple other tables, right? So if you think of like a star schema with conformed dimensions, if you had multiple facts, for example, then the security would apply to that dimension table, which then by nature would join to multiple other tables and filter them correctly. So that's why you would always want to apply or join your security table, however you build that, on a dimension that's conformed to other fact tables or other tables in your model. If I can get back, I'll see if I can go back and find the screen here that shows.
Okay.
That. Right, perfect. So here, if you were to have the join set up, again, this join itself wouldn't change, and again, you'd want the double join, so that's always applied to this. And then you would make sure that so let's say you would have another fact table right here, or whatever it may be actually, or another table out here. So the security is applied to the country table, which by nature applies it to every other table in the model.
I have one more here, and that is, are there any performance implications of doing this?
No.
That you can think of?
Performs like every other filter, right? I mean, to be honest, if you would load it in memory potentially, right? But just like any other filter, it would be applied, just like as such. So if you have a model that is in memory or not in memory, it doesn't really matter. You would load your security table potentially in memory just for speed and performance wise. And you can use the hybrid model. I forgot what it's called now, but there's a way that you can have some tables in memory and some tables not. You would want to have that table in memory so that, it obviously will filter your security table quickly and then apply the filter downstream. So it wouldn't be any slower than you manually defining that filter, right? The lookup would be your biggest hit on that table, but again, it would be in memory and should be almost instantaneous. So we can prove that the engine behind the scenes is extremely fast. So, I mean, I can't imagine you would have a million rows of security, type of thing. So I don't see there being any issue there. And again, the key would be to have the security table in memory. I know that though it does work with direct query also.
So what you've shown here is not direct query, it's memory.
In this case, simple model, it's all in memory, but it's irrelevant if it's in memory or not. So the in-memory part is it's the same as the concept. At the end of the day, you're joining a table to some other tables. So you can, I forgot when it was released, about 6 months ago, you can have one table in memory and the other table's not in memory. So it's very common to have your dimensions in memory and maybe your fact table to be row levels or direct query, and it functions perfectly fine, right? So I forgot what the properties set. There's a way you can set the, it's like a composite hybrid model, whatever it's called. I don't know the exact name and convention of it, but yes, you could do that. So, but again, most people are going to have everything in memory. I mean, let's face it, like you can load just about anything in memory now in Power BI. I mean, it's very, very robust.
Okay, and I've got one more that just came in. It says, will this security apply to filters and drop downs that the user views? So if I have like a slicer drop down, will it apply to that as well as the content?
So this gets into the semantics of Power BI. The answer is yes. And again, what happens is that you're gonna basically it's like taking a filter on this table and you're applying to that slicer. Okay, so if I have a slicer, or it doesn't matter whatever visualization, any query whatsoever, and it doesn't have to contain any data from security table. If you were to go in there and manually create a filter on it and say, username equals John Doe, however that works, that's exactly what's happening behind the scenes. Okay, so you don't have to tell it. It's going to know that it's applying it. So basically, what would happen is it would go through the join process to apply that filter to that user, right? So if there's a direct join relationship to that dimension table, then yes, it would. If not, then it would it would go through whatever join path is set up to apply the script to the slicer. But it's basically adding a filter. It's basically adding a page filter, right? If you know Power BI, you can add a filter for the overall page. That's basically what's happening. It's adding a page filter, if you will, on this table that then forces every query, every slicer, every whatever to consume. Okay. And how it consumes is based on your model and how the joins are set up.
Okay, that's the last of the questions that I see, and we're about running out of time anyway. So
one thing I do want to point out that didn't get asked was if somebody doesn't exist in a table, right? So if you have a user that's new to the company and they're not quite, haven't gone through the process of being added to the table, they will not see any data. So basically, it'll apply the filter just like any other filter, and if they don't exist in the security table, there's no rows returned, and as such, the join is an equity join all the way through. You get no data, right? So you don't have to worry about new users potentially not seeing data they're not supposed to, because they wouldn't see anything. And again, going back to my previous webinar a month ago about doing a centralized metadata model, if you do that centralized metadata model, any report that uses this model, and you can have as many reports as you want, as long as they're using this central model, the security's applied, right? Because you built it in the main model. That's again one of the benefits of using a centralized metadata model, which is again similar to some of the legacy Power BI or legacy BI tools that are out there.
All right, so I think again we're up at the half hour, and so I want to again thank you all for joining. Do check out our Take30 page to look for the new sessions that are coming out, and again take advantage of the Take30 one-on-one sessions. We'll be announcing the availability of that registration page as well. All right, thanks very much, and have a great day.
Thank you.